The deadly collision at Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge has people all across the country worried about the dangers of large cargo ships and the stability of their local infrastructure. But in Chelsea, there's another top concern about these ships: the pollution they spew as they come and go from the Boston harbor, and the serious health impacts it can have on kids in the area. GBH News investigative reporter Chris Burrell has more.
What looks like dunes in a desert is, in reality, a massive store of road salt. The salt's used to combat snow and ice in hundreds of communities across Massachusetts. But it's the residents of Chelsea, a city just outside of Boston, who live with a salt yard close enough to breathe in the emissions from a ship that idled for 3 days while an army of diesel-powered machinery unloaded road salt, shipped here from Chile.
All you see along our waterfront is the ships, the huge salt pile, all the industry, the big tankers and stuff. That's what you see. You don't see the water.
Industrial ports all along Boston Harbor are busier than ever, from Chelsea to South Boston. In 2023, ships totaling more than 21 million tons in size carried everything from home heating fuel to flat-screen TVs into Boston Harbor, a 25% increase from 2022 in shipping tonnage. And while the shipping boom is a sign of a vibrant economy, there's growing evidence that residents in communities like Chelsea are paying a price. This drawbridge connecting Chelsea to East Boston goes up multiple times each day to make way for ships. You can see the pollution coming from the ship's exhaust and from the idling cars that wait as long as 20 minutes for the bridge to go back down. EPA data collected over the last 2 years indicates exposure to fine diesel particulate matter and other air pollutants in many parts of Chelsea is among the highest in Massachusetts. And, according to state data, the number of children under 15 who end up in the emergency room for asthma is double the statewide average.
Both my children are asthmatic and myself, and it's been heightened in these past 2 years. I want to say, at times I feel like I'm struggling breathing just walking up my stairs. That's not normal for me. I ask myself, what's going on here? I can't put a finger on it, but if I could, I would totally guess that it's the air quality here.
Chris Burrell joins me now, along with Chelsea City Councilor Melinda Vega. Chris, Chelsea, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Chris, just subjectively, what does it feel like to deal with this kind of pollution? Like how is it different from what you might see in other parts of the city that don't have the same burden of pollution?
Well, the ships are burning some of the worst fuel there is. It's some of the highest sulfur content fuel. They're idling at port. It's just spewing out. Then all of the unloading, offloading of these ships is creating more diesel exhaust. So the EPA screened, the data showing from EPA and a relatively new sensor in Chelsea alone is showing diesel particulate matter specifically at something like 93 to 96% percentile in the state, meaning that's among the worst going on in the state. So how it feels, I think you'd have to ask, Melinda Vega and her family, who are breathing in not just the emissions from these ships, but obviously there's a ton of sources going on in Chelsea from the Tobin Bridge, from Logan International Airport. But we wanted to look specifically at what's going on with the shipping industry because it is increasing.
And Melinda, you're dealing with this as a city councilor, but you're also dealing with this in your family. What's happening there?
Absolutely. So I'd say on a personal level, this is something that I have faced my whole life. I am asthmatic. I've lived in Chelsea my whole life, and now I'm a mother of 2 children who are also asthmatic. I'd say that in the last 2 years, it has been heightened, and I can't really identify the why, in terms of, why is it that my children are constantly having asthma attacks where that wasn't the case. We have to use our inhaler more frequently than ever. And I would definitely say it's related to our poor air quality.
So we have data showing that asthma admissions for children in Chelsea are substantially higher than they are in the rest of the state. And it seems like a clear linkage to the particulates emissions. And we know that small particulates of the sort that are emitted by these diesel engines are the most dangerous types of particulate pollution. I should say, personally, my wife always makes fun of me. I am obsessed by the issue of small particulate pollution because it is so dangerous. She always says that when we have kids, I'm going to scurry around behind them with an air filter just to protect them from this. But since that's not a realistic option, what is being done to try and address this problem?
Well, around here, not a whole lot. My second story is going to be looking at things that some little bits of traction that are going on in terms of like kind of enforcement and pollution. But in terms of the emissions, there's really not much going on. There is a chance that locally, regionally, policymakers, organizations, Massport, for instance, could try to get some money, federal money that's now available through the Biden administration through 2 separate acts that are specifically going to decarbonize and electrify the ports in the United States. And that could go to shore power is a huge issue that's been mandated for more than a decade in California. The studies I've looked at, it made a difference that if the ships come in, they can stop idling their engines, they tie into an electrical source, that stops that pollution that's coming out of their stacks and going into the communities such as East Boston or in Chelsea where Melinda and her family and thousands of other families live.
Melinda, what's the city of Chelsea going to try to do about this?
To be honest, we work very closely with Green Roots, who's a nonprofit organization that does environmental justice work in our community. And they are already doing so much with retrofitting trucks historically in Chelsea and so forth. They're trailblazers when it comes to our environmental justice work. So I envision us working and coordinating efforts with them. And, that's my role as a city councilor. But I would say on a personal level, for me, it's also very important that we continue to create awareness and educate our family members, our community on the importance of this matter and how they can be involved and engaged and ensure that we are making progress in this and that the monies are being spent in our environmental justice communities so that these grant opportunities that exist are given to communities that have these burdens. And I think it should be they should prioritize environmental justice communities.
What would you like to see the state do?
Exactly that. I think all across the board, if they could identify which are the top communities that are impacted by this, I think that they should prioritize us and give us money, allocate funds to ensure that our trucks are being retrofitted and that what Chris just mentioned in terms of the Biden administration is prioritized in the city.
Is there any movement at the state level to try and make this sort of infrastructure investments that might remediate these pollution problems?
Massport tells me for the very first time ever they're going to do an emissions inventory at their ports, which would be the cruise port, Flynn Cruise Port in South Boston, Conley Container Terminal. They just spent including millions and millions of dollars of state and federal grants to deepen the port at Conley Container Terminal, to modernize that port. The community members I spoke to in South Boston were really angry. They said they fought 10 years ago to try to get at least an environmental review of that project. None took place. That was under the Baker administration, under former Secretary Beaton. They just said, no, we don't need to do an environmental impact review of the expansion. Well, Conley Container Terminal and the cruise port are expanding. If you live in East D or in Chelsea, you may think it's across the water. The engineer I interviewed from Olin College of Engineering, who has a sensor set up just to look at Logan and Jeffreys Point, says, wait a second, I'm getting all this stuff coming over the water. So it's there. People have not been looking at it. So, if Massport wants to go ahead with that, maybe Massport's going to put in an application for some of this decarbonization, electrification. They had originally opposed shore power at Conley Container Terminal. They say they're going to try to go for it at least with the cruise ships.
So what's the time frame it would take, assuming that they did go forward with that, before you'd start to see some improvement?
That's going to be my follow-up story in terms of the time frame on the shore power thing. It's a big undertaking, but a lot of cruise terminals, Brooklyn, Port Authority, New York, New Jersey has shore power at its Brooklyn cruise terminal. Doesn't help the people who live in Newark, which is a gigantic port, and subjected to similar stuff that people in Chelsea, Eastie, Revere, Southie are subjected to.
So when we're trying to address this, like we're talking about different academic issues, there's sort of the public health concern, things like that. Are there any estimates of sort of the cost burden of the state that would be alleviated by trying to address this? Could they make that economic argument? They
have made that economic argument on a national level. One of the earliest studies I looked at actually posited what if they fully decarbonize and electrify these ports. I don't have the number at the top of my head, but it's substantial in terms of public health savings for the investment that was made. If that investment were made, and also the study done in Yale said, that the advances made in California, largely through a specific, state mandates saying you cannot keep idling these engines, you must electrify vast portions of this port activity, that there is a very clear and direct benefit to the health of the near community members.
So is there any pressure from the state legislature, from the representative from Chelsea, to impose that kind of a mandate?
No, not that I've seen yet. When I talked to the state and asked for, what are you guys doing, I was told, take a look at our new environmental justice strategy. I'm trying to get an interview with the person who heads that up, who actually used to work at Green Roots. So far, I haven't gotten that interview yet. I want to ask them exactly those questions. This new environmental justice strategy, had it been in place when Conley Container Terminal expanded, they would have automatically been subject to an environmental impact review, because that is considered an environmental justice community. All the port communities along Boston Harbor are environmental justice communities.
So, Councilor, you have a platform with your office, and you have one here right now. Would you like to ask the governor, would ask the state to step in?
Absolutely. And I was going to take the moment to say, I personally know, Chris, who you're speaking with. So I will definitely, or who you're speaking about. So I will definitely reach out to that individual and ask for a meeting. I think that, the time is now. And this person, we worked hand in hand on campaigns in Chelsea. So, I don't see the why not and the hesitation. I think the time is now to ensure that our community, in terms of the burden, we get funded for the burdens that we constantly are facing, and we need to remediate, make sure that as a city councilor and a politician, I always say this to my constituents: it's your job to hold me accountable, and I say the same thing to our governor, our state rep, and Maria Belén, right? Who used to work at Green Roots. The time is now. If we could have a meeting to answer these questions and figure out what are we going to do as a state to ensure that we get that funding allocated to environmental justice communities like Chelsea.
Melinda, Chris, I know this is an issue you'll be tracking closely, both personally and on your job, Melinda and Chris, that you're going to be following this for us. I'll just say this is an issue where the science has changed a lot in the last few years, and we know it is way more serious than it was a few years ago. So I hope that you'll be able to keep us up to date with what's going on.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Chris, Melinda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.